So I'm doing a series on the five principles, five unity basic principles, and here's an example of what they look like up there. And I'm on principle number 3 today, just to give you a quick review as to what we've been looking at, because so many of you have been gone all this time over summer. Gosh, it seems like we have everybody back. Welcome back for many of you. And those of you who've been here all along, holding the space for everybody to be away on your vacation and enjoying things. It's all right, because we're here to celebrate all the wondrous ways in which we connect. So the five unity basic principles give us a guideline, a sense of how we can organize our attention awareness as we really engage the spiritual path, the spiritual journey. Principle number 1 is that there's only one presence and one power active and at work in my life and in the universe, God the good, and we affirm that every Sunday. And so what that means is that there's just God going on in our life and in the world. Now, if for some reason you have an exception to that principle, that there's just God going on, that's why we have principle number 2. Because principle number 2 states that our essence is God, therefore our nature is inherently good. As a matter of fact, Jesus Christ demonstrated and manifested this essence that we describe as the truth of us. And so principle number 2 is that we are the ones unto our own life. We are the Christ of God, Christ unto our own world. We are here, sent by God, to be the avenue through which that which is spirit, presence, can connect up and make the world a better place. And if we don't know that, if we live in some sense of less than we are the one, that's how it's possible that our life looks and feels against us. When we live in the disconnect, that's how it's possible for us to have our life and the people in it the matter with us. But when we live in the awareness of the truth that everything about us has prepared us to be unto our life experience, the avenue through which God expresses, we are the one unto our own life. Until we know that, there's still a part of us that lives separate and apart from our own sense of well-being and worth, our own sense of wholeness, knowing the truth of us. And so that's principle number 2. And now today we're going to be talking about principle number 3, which is that we have the power to create our own personal reality. It says here, we are co-creators with God, creating through our thoughts that we hold in our mind. So thoughts held in mind produce after their own kind. So this is what we espouse in unity, and that is we have a direct relationship to how our life looks and feels unto us. And if we don't appreciate that we create our own personal reality, we live in the belief that life happens to us instead of we are participating, co-creating our life experience. And so part of our challenge, part of our struggle as spiritual beings living in this human experience is that to manage the part of ourself that has to operate in a world that lives in the belief of separation. Everything that happens in the world lives in the context that we're separate and apart. But if we have a spiritual principle, or the context of what we espouse is our interconnection, our oneness with all of life, if there's just God, then our experience of separation and our experience of the ills of the world are an effect of the disconnect, as opposed to something out there that actually has as its aim to be against us. And so part of our struggle is to unpack this dynamic of ourself in relationship to a world that is not capable of mirroring the truth of us. Because Mary and Joseph were our parents, we didn't get from the moment that we were brought into this world that we are unto our world the one, the Christ of God. Instead, we got something else. What message did you receive about your worth as you grew up? What did your religious upbringing tell you about your nature and what your value is, and therefore what you must become or subject yourself to if you are to fit in, or for you to be saved, or for you to be well? And so part of our struggle is to recognize that being in the world but not of it requires superpowers, requires tools, abilities that we're not given as we grow up in our world. And so part of the challenge is to learn, to educate ourselves with respect to who are we really in the context of our individual selves and in the greater context of our oneness with each other. So part of sorting this out begins to learn that while thoughts in mind produce after their own kind, this whole concept of mind and of thoughts have changed in recent history. Now we know so much more about how our brain works and understanding how our body participates in sustaining our beliefs and sustaining our concept of reality and our own personal relationship to our experience. Because when we feel uncomfortable, when we feel out of ease, then we look outside of ourselves for evidence of what's causing it, as opposed to looking inside of ourselves for how is it possible that I'm feeling uncomfortable if it's all God? How is it possible that I'm feeling not enough if it's all God? If we don't do that inquiry, that reconciliation of trying to reconcile how is it possible if it's all God that I'm having an experience that's less than that, if we're not in that inquiry, then we're looking outside of ourselves. And so part of the struggle now is to really gather the power, gather the tools, gather the information that enables us to work directly with the part of ourself that has the power to make our life either a heaven or a hell, depending upon what perspective we take. So, here's a little movie.
Some level that your thoughts have effect in your life. Yes? So you think 60 to 70,000 thoughts in one day. 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts the day before. So what is the likelihood of something happening different in your life if 90% of those thoughts, conscious or unconscious, are the same thoughts the day before? Because the same thoughts always lead to the same choices. Same choices will lead to the same behaviors. The same behaviors will create the same experiences. And the same experiences produce the same emotions. And the same emotions drive your very same thoughts. And your biology, your neurocircuitry, neurochemistry, your hormone, even your genetic expression is equal to how you think, how you act, and how you feel. And how you think, how you act, and how you feel is your personality. And personality creates your personal reality. That's it.
So, apologize about the video. The technology today is not working for me. It's not against me, it's just that's what's happening. So I want us to consider this, that our thoughts, our actions, our feelings have so much effect on our entire experience, even to the extent of informing our genes and the dynamics of what's happening internally, switching on and off the various mechanisms that support our survival, so to speak. And if we don't understand that those dynamics of how we think about things and what we are doing and how we feel are all generating and broadcasting an energetic signature that causes life to mirror back to us how we're being with it. And so if we don't have some mechanism that reminds us, oh, I'm being with what I'm having right now out of my sense of not enough, as opposed to I'm being with what I'm having out of my sense that this is for me, and therefore the proper felt experience if something is for me is thank you, is gratitude. And if I'm not in my experience feeling a sense of valuing what's happening, then I'm living in a reality that is generated out of the disconnect, out of the part of myself that is living separate and apart from its own sense of well-being and worth. I like this quote. The point of thinking differently is that it leads to behaving differently. And if we don't see that the same thoughts, the same feelings, the same behaviors continue to perpetuate the very same circumstances of our life, and then we try to get God to change the way the mirror works. Have you ever tried to get God to change the way the mirror works in your life? Well, God's not going to do that, because God has no problem with how your life looks and feels, because God knows that how your life looks and feels is not the truth of things, but rather knowing that all things are for us. Then we have to recognize that until we behave and be with what's happening in our life out of a different presence than our old conditioned self, then our life is going to basically be a continuation of our past. And so that's very important for us to acknowledge, that some aspect of our spiritual practice has to be about paying attention to what we're making our experience mean. And the dynamic of thought in the context of our body-mind experience has to be managed in the context of changing our thoughts, changing what we do, and changing how we feel within ourselves. And if that doesn't become the focus of our work, then we become fascinated with what's happening out there that's for us or against us, instead of focused on doing the work that shifts how we're creating our own personal reality. See if this works.
So that if you want to create a new personal reality, a new life, then you're going to have to start changing your personality. How many people are with me? I'm London. Yeah? You see, most people try to create a new personal reality as the same personality. Doesn't work. You literally have to become someone else. So there's a principle in neuroscience that says that nerve cells fire together, wire together. And if you keep thinking the same thoughts, making the same choices, demonstrating the same behaviors, creating the same experiences, the same networks of neurons, and the same patterns, all for the familiar feeling you call you to refer that identity.
Okay, so all for the familiar feeling of confirming ourselves. You see, all the dynamics that we go through. I mean, think about when you wake up in the morning. What's the first thing you do? You just think about your day, right? It's almost like we're booting up all of our old self to manage our day, instead of really being clear that our life will run us unconsciously if we just let it. And indeed, it does. And if we're not aware that how our life is and what gets created is happening primarily unconsciously, as if it's a program that's running us, if we're not aware of that, we just allow life to happen as if it's happening to us, and never recognizing that there's the circuitry of our unconscious self. In other words, our self, think of who you are, your self lives in the context of a system that, when we're unconscious, still operates, still runs us, and we can describe this unconscious self system as our habits of being. Who are you in the habit of being in your life? Who are you in the habit of thinking of yourself in the context of worthy or not? What are you in the habit of doing, and is your doing unconscious? Are you in the habit of spending unconsciously, eating unconsciously, feeling yourself active or out there doing stuff because that's just what you're needing to do in order to feel alive? Are we in the habit of having our life as if it's against us or somebody's the matter with us? Are we in the habit of feeling insufficient or inadequate? Are we in the habit of believing that the world is not a safe or a trustable place? Are we in the habit of creating stories and projecting onto our life all the ways in which we can't succeed or it's not going to matter? We have to begin to take ownership and responsibility for what lives inside of us, that is the unconscious dimension of ourself that has been programmed into us because we have been brought up in the context of the disconnect as being the reality that we live in. But that's not the reality that we live in. There's this wonderful physicist named David Bohm. How many are familiar with David Bohm? And he did a class, and Jane and I have read his book called Thought as a System. And his whole class was about the whole dynamic of thought. And he says this: the general tacit assumption is thought is what is just, excuse me, let me start this over again. The general tacit assumption in thought is that it's just telling you the way things are, and it's not doing anything. So in other words, we assume that our thought is just telling stuff about what's happening, and the thought itself is not really doing anything. We're the ones doing it based upon how we're thinking about things. But he's saying this instead, that you are inside there deciding what you're going to do with the information. That's not the truth. The truth is that thoughts run you. We are run by our unconscious thought process, and if we don't intervene, then what gets created seems to happen as if it's out there. We seem as if source is out there instead of in here. And the reality is that we are source unto our own life, and therefore if our circuitry of ourself is embedded in beliefs or habits or ways of being that aren't in alignment with the truth that there's just God, then the consequence of that is a life that looks and feels against us, and our commitment is having to have things be a certain way, instead of being able to be the arbiter of our own well-being based upon who we decide we're going to be with what we're having as our experience. One last movie, we'll see if it works.
Yeah. Every time you have a thought, you need a chemical. And if you have a great thought, or unlimited thought, or a joyful thought, you turn on a set of circuits in your brain, fired in a very specific sequence, pattern, combination, that produces a level of mind, turns on another part of the brain that makes a chemical for it to begin to feel exactly the way you were just thinking. Great, limited, joyful. Now, the negative thought, an unhappy thought, or a self-depreciating thought, you turn on a different set of circuits in a different.
Okay, I can't do this. So Dr. Joe is sharing the principle that when we think a thought, we also create chemistry within our body, and that chemistry is experienced as a feeling or as an emotion. And then especially when that feeling or emotion is uncomfortable, then we create a story around that discomfort. And so the thought creates the feeling, and the feeling generates the story, and the story re-embeds ourselves in the pseudo-reality of whatever that process is for us. And so in order for us to extricate ourselves from our own habits of being and the circuitry of ourself that's embedded in an unconscious dynamic of life, Dr. Joe uses the expression, bless you, we have to recondition the body to a new mind. In other words, our body is just a servant of the dynamics of what's happening in consciousness and mind. And so the mind, or the circuitry of ourself, is what is generating the felt sense of discomfort, which is really, bless you, is really all about our disconnect. Every uncomfortable feeling that you can feel is your body trying to say, we've lost our connection. You know, there's no signal from the master Wi-Fi. You know, we're living in the disconnect. And so if we begin to use those moments of sensing the discomfort as a thread that's connected to some part of us that's living in separation or isolation or in regret or in some form of unforgiveness, if we can understand that that's what it's about, then we don't have to push away the outer experience that's a mirror to that. Instead, we just have to recognize that we have to approach that part of ourself with a different awareness, as opposed to thinking that there's something wrong with us. So part of this is that we have to recognize that, I'm going to come back to this in just a second, we have to recognize that the circuitry of ourself, we still have to be with what's happening out of some congruent state. We still have to do something. We're still going to have our life a certain way. We're still going to feel, we're still going to be working with beliefs, and we're still going to have perceptions and meaning making. All of these things are still a part of our self system, but it doesn't have to be tethered to the habits of our past. And indeed, the only way to break the cycle of this system is to focus on something that's not tethered into the past, and that's our future. And so, as this is another quote from Dr. Joe, if you were to take your attention just for a moment, just think about this. If you were to take your attention just for a moment off of your body, off of your life, off of the things you have, off of your identity and the things you own and the people that you know and the places that you go and your concept of time, and the only thing that would be left would be pure consciousness. You wouldn't like puff away into invisibility. It's just that whenever we begin to bring our awareness off of our body, have you ever found yourself preoccupied with how your body is? Well, what would happen if you took your attention off of it for a few moments? Your body would still be there, but some part of you would be freed, right? What if you took your attention off of your life, off of your identity, just for a moment? Just imagine what it would be like to feel that you're no longer tethered to any of these things, but those things aren't gone. It's just that now your awareness is not identified or reduced to any external object. Now your awareness can be invested in who and what you want to become. And then who and what you want to become informs your body and your life and your identity and the things and the people and the experiences that you have. It happens from the inside out. But we must be pulled by something that transcends our everyday self. We must break the habit of being ourself to recondition our body to a different mind. Speaking of such things, we're going to have actually a book study starting October 3rd, Thursday evening at 6:30. Ken Close. Ken, are you here today? Ken is going to be teaching a book study on breaking the habit of being yourself. So mark that on your calendar. All right. So last Sunday, Jane talked about romancing your future. And interestingly enough, when we are engaged in looking at what our future could be in the context of fulfilling our purpose and passion, there's some interesting phenomena that takes place. We automatically extricate ourselves from the old circuits, from our habits that are entangled in those circuits of our past self. And so Dr. Joe says this: each time you make a new choice that is in alignment with your future, you are priming your brain to install the neurological hardware to actually think, act, and feel like the person you want to be in your future. So this is neurologically, this is real. We have to be in the practice of really being very clear as to what is the personality, the personal reality that we're wanting to step into, and who do we have to be in order for that expression to be in alignment with our thoughts, our actions, and our feelings, and to begin to build and construct our life in the context of who do we need to be with whatever it is that I'm having that enables me to use whatever I'm having as if it's an abundance unto me. And until we understand that that's our capacity, that's our power, that's our superpower, then we will mortgage our well-being on whether or not life circumstances are look the way they feel in order for us to feel okay about things. Dr. Joe says the quantum field responds not to what we want, but responds to who we are being. So we can't think of our future as something that's missing from us. We have to think of our future as already created, already assembled. It's just that we have yet to open ourselves into the fullness of being in alignment with that future so it could find us. And so we have to focus on who we are being with what we're having as the stepping stones of moving out of our predictable past into the future that calls us into the fulfillment of our purpose and passion. And it begins with being in the question, who do I need to be right now with what I'm having that enables me to use what I'm having as if it's my abundance? I said it twice now. That must mean it's important. All right, here's the work. So identify one area of your life that you would like to transform. What changes in how you think, feel, and behave are necessary to bring about this new dimension of ourselves. So part of what the challenge is, we have to shift out of believing that the world needs to show up a certain way in order for me to be okay. We have to think in terms of, I have to create the world that I want to experience. And it's just like we have to create the ministry that we want to create that is sustainable in the future. We have to create the new future that we want to experience. And so in order to create that future, we have to think differently. We have to feel differently. We have to act differently. And if we don't know what those specific actions are, then we'll just wait for it to happen. And so we have to be clear. What is it that we want to transform? How must I think, feel, and act in order for that to happen? Number 2, what feelings or states of being would your life to routinely experience? Would you like to I have a speech impeachment. What feelings or states of being would you like to routinely experience if you had a conscious choice in any given moment? So think about that. What if you had a moment where you could decide how to be? Think about it for a moment. Because most of us believe that life happens, we react. We just react. Someone judges us, we react. But what if in every single moment there's a choice? And in that choice, every moment there's the choice that says, who do you want to be with me? But we're not paying attention. That's our choice. That's what life gives to us. That is our power. And if we don't take that power, then we don't receive what is the benefit, the gift behind it. And finally, feel it, be it, maintain a conscious connection to the person you wish to become. Because it's our felt experience that gives us a connection to what is trying to find us. And so that's principle number 3. Next week we will have Will Tuttle, and I'm thinking that his workshop on finding your own internal higher self, that internal voice, is going to be so important, because that's half the battle. Just to be able to have a voice inside that you can connect up to, and for that voice to be a voice of spirit and a presence, that's the superpower that we have yet to unleash. God bless you all. Thank you so much.